Good evening and Happy New Year to everyone. Hopefully our technology is working tonight so that we don't have any difficulties. But if there's any glitches along the way, please let me know, and either myself or Jamie will try to fix those. So welcome back. Happy New Year. Hope everybody had a good beginning to 2021. It's probably very different than the way we've celebrated the new year in the past. So despite that, it's good to see everybody back and still able to connect with us. And we will continue to bring classes online, regardless of social distancing. So this way we can be close, even if we are separated by many miles. Tonight, for our introductory class for the beginning of the new year, I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit about our founder, the monk Kukai, who founded Shingon. There's a couple reasons I wanted to take a little time and talk about Kukai's life, his thinking, his teachings, his writings. We'll do this little by little through this entire introduction course. But as it is our lineage, it makes sense to talk a little bit about the founder of that lineage and really what that means. Many of the things that you'll read about Kukai, I guess I have to stress, are often written from the academic standpoint. And that's important because there are times in Kukai's life and in his writings where he makes distinctions between Shingon and other schools. And oftentimes it's written about or may give you the impression that there's some sort of fight between different lineages of Buddhist teaching, or that Kukai was a bit of an upstart and, proclaimed Shingon to be superior to every other school of Buddhism. So some of those things need to be put into context in terms of how his writings came about, or how monks and nuns at the time produced writings. So we're going to talk a little about some of those ideas in the coming weeks and months, and try to give us a better idea of who this person is. But I think it's important to understand that without Kukai, there wouldn't be there would be no Shingon. And we're talking about an individual over 1,200 years ago who set in motion a set of teachings that would go on to become probably the fourth largest denomination, so to speak, in Japan, Buddhist school. So it's a fairly sizable seismic shift in how the Buddhist teaching was presented, but it's also helpful to understand what Buddhism looked like at the time. And I think in many ways, the Buddhism of Kukai's time, in many ways, looks a lot like the Buddhism of our time, especially here in North America. And what I mean by that is you can't think of Buddhism in the same way as you may think about Christianity in Europe. So there was not a church in every town. There was not a expectation that people would go to the temple every Sunday. It was not a congregational practice. For the most part, during Kukai's time, the Buddhist temples were associated or geographically near centers of government power. So the people who were interested in patronizing the Buddhist teaching, who might take part or listen to Buddhist lectures, were people in the government or at court. So if we make this comparison, it would be as if you only found a Buddhist temple, in the state capital or there's a smattering of them around Washington, D.C., and the only people talking about these ideas were, the senators and congressmen. So this is a very different time. In Japanese history, this was sort of early on in the introduction of the Buddhist teaching, and most of the people who were interested in it were, or who even had access, were those who were highly educated. This teaching had not really permeated the country as much as we see it today, and not nearly in the same way that you would see in Europe. If you think about what did the 700s or 800s look like in Europe, and where were their churches, and what was the understandings. It's very different. Things looked very different religiously. One of the other reasons you see this difference is Japan had an existing indigenous religion, Shinto. So this is what you would find people practicing. People's religious understanding was very much based in Shinto ideas. So Buddhism was the foreign and imported religion compared to the indigenous religion. So in many ways, very similar to what you find in North America. Buddhism is the Johnny-come-lately spiritual practice that people have access to, versus many people, probably most people here, were not born into Buddhist families. It's something you became interested in later on. So the questions that people had in Kukai's time, in many ways, are similar to the questions that people have today. And the perspective that people are bringing to the teaching has a lot of similarities with Kukai's time. So if you were born, Christian or Muslim in North America, no one asks you why did you choose Christianity, right? That is a question that was never brought up. But if you identify with a Buddhist group, people may ask you, what brought you to the Buddhist teaching, or, why do you go to the temple, or, why did you switch teams, or something like that. So that would be very similar. People would have been much more curious why someone would go down that pathway. So Kukai has to answer those questions for himself, as well as for his family and those around him when he first sets off on this pathway. So we'll start at the beginning. And that is, Kukai was born June 15th, the year 774, in a city that's now called Zensuji. And Zensuji is not on the main island of Japan. It is on the island of Shikoku. And the island of Shikoku is, of course, home to the 88 Temple pilgrimage. So during Kukai's time, there were no bridges between the islands. Today, there are bridges over the inland sea of Japan, so you can drive, take a bus or train between the islands. So of course, any commerce or communication between the main island of Japan and the outer islands was by ship. And even now, the inland sea of Japan is quite a rough sea. It's a difficult passage. They actually have whirlpools. I don't know if anyone's ever been across the I believe the Seto Island inlet. It'll show you, as you go over the bridge, you can see these huge whirlpools. It looks like something, you expect the Kraken to come out of the ocean or something. It looks like a Jurassic Park type scene, but there's a tidal variation between the two. So you get stuck in the whirlpool, and that was the end. There was no Coast Guard to come get you. So it was a difficult passage. You can see the island at certain areas across the inland sea. So there's a lot of fishermen and things like that, but there were areas where it was still difficult. So travel was an issue. So I want us to keep in mind when we're talking about Kukai's life, getting from place to place was an undertaking. We have to keep that in mind. And so for people to make these journeys, especially when their motivation is spreading religious teaching, it took quite a bit of effort. Very different than, us deciding to take a vacation. You get on the internet and, book your accommodations or something. This is very different. A lot of it was walking. So this was, these were huge distances compared to how we think of travel and distance today. So I'm going to show you, probably, let's see who's on tonight. Probably maybe one of you, two of you have been to this area of Japan. So if my mouse is going to work, I will show you on Google Maps where we're talking about. Sorry, for some reason, when we open Zoom, my mouse doesn't want to work. Please bear with me while I try to get this to function. There we go.
Take as much time as you need.
Thank you. It's going really slow.
Don't worry, I get it. I deal with it enough in online school.
Okay, I got the map up. So hopefully you can see this.
Yes. And
Thank
woohoo! You did it.
It's still moving really
job.
slow. If you see my
Good
mouse
job.
moving,
Me see it.
that's how slow it is for me. Okay, so I'm going to try to zoom in. So the, there we go. The little stars over here is, if you're curious, this is Koyasan. So you can zoom in and see where Koyasan is in the mountains of Japan. And as we zoom out, you can see there's not much around that. So we're rather deep in the mountains. I'm trying to zoom out here. Okay. This is the inland sea of Japan, and there is now a, look at this is really slow. A bridge that connects between Kobe, this inland island, and then Shikoku, so you can actually drive across now. And over here is Zensuji. So this is Kobayashi birthplace. There's now a temple there, of course. So this whole temple complex is Kobayashi's birthplace. So before the pandemic, I had planned to actually take a group to Japan in 2020, but of course that wasn't possible. So that will be postponed. Well, it doesn't want to let me zoom in any farther, but you can if you want to. If you go on Google Maps. Oh, okay, good. There we go. So this is the Courtyard of Zensuji. So Zensuji was actually founded by Kobayashi during his lifetime. and named after his father. So he founded the temple in honor of his family lineage. And I would probably be better off advising you guys to, if you want to walk around on Google Maps and kind of thing, you can do it on your own computer, because it was working. We tested this just before we started, and it does not like me today. Goodness, this is really... Well, as I try to... Alrighty, well, we will try to stop screen sharing, and that's where Zensuji is. So this is in Sanuki province, Kagawa prefecture. So if you're looking for it, you'll probably have a better chance. For some reason, it's totally frozen on my side. As with many, what can you say? So you probably heard on the news, December 21, we had this planetary conjunction between, was it Jupiter and Saturn? And many people speculated that this may have been the star that the three wise men saw, foretelling Jesus's birth. So many, people who have become saints, special, there's often something that is associated with their birth that's considered special. So Kobayashi's parents, the mother had a dream before Kukai's birth, one day before his birth, and she dreamed she saw a monk, a Buddhist monk that looked like an Indian Buddhist monk, riding on a cloud, entering through her chest. And this was interpreted to be the Buddhist monk Amoghavajra. Amoghavajra is the teacher of Kukai's teacher, but that was also the same day that Amoghavajra died. So Amoghavajra had died in China, and then the day he passed away, Kobayashi's mother had this dream. Some people interpreted this dream, maybe we could say traditionally, that Kukai was the reincarnation of Amoghavajra. I think that's kind of debatable. Usually you have to have passed away before the person was conceived, technically, to be a reincarnation. But this was one of the sort of special events that surrounded Kukai's birth. So when Kukai was born, he was given the name Mao, which sometimes translates as true fish. This was sort of it's very common to have an actual name and then several nicknames. Sometimes in other cultures, children aren't named until they're a little bit older to get their formal name. But I guess today we'd probably say Kukai was precocious. So he was known to be a very bright child, very intelligent, very promising. He was born into an aristocratic family. So a family had a lot of connections. His father was a government minister. And at that time in history in East Asia, this was probably the highest station in life if you ended up working as a government official. So think about that's very different than today, right? Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur or something like that. But at that time, people aspired to, actually have a position in government service. And following in the Chinese model, people would take the what would we call it, the civil service examination, and that's where you would determine your rank. So if a family was already connected with that system or had some government position, you would send your children to school and prepare them for the civil service examination, and your scores, your test scores, it was a merit system, would determine your government position. So you may get a job as a judge, or local governor, minister of a province, or postmaster general. It wasn't based on who you knew. It was based in large part, of course, it's based on who you knew. It's always that way, but it was also based in large part on your test scores, and that required you to study the Confucian classics. So when Kukai was around the age of 14 or 15, he was sent to Kyoto. He was sent to Nara. At that time, that was the capital of Japan. And he was there to study with his uncle, who was a government official also. So his uncle, Ato no Otari, was the fairly high-ranking official in Nara, was actually an advisor to the emperor, and he entered university there. So if you're noticing the ages of entering university as a 14, 15 years old versus in our system we were typically entering university at 18. University was not quite the same as it is now. So the system was, if your family had money, you would have a private tutor, and many of these tutors were either retired government officials, great scholars, or had their own school of some sort. So you would have a system of tutors, and then people apprenticing or studying under those tutors, and you would study the classics, the Book of Odes, the Book of Poems, the different histories of China, and primarily it was memorization. So you'd be memorizing the Confucian classics and understanding the lessons that are in those. So if you've ever read The Art of War or Tao Te Ching or any of these ancient Chinese texts, this would have been your textbook. So in large part, it was memorization of these texts and understanding the lessons of history. So how would you make decisions as a government official? You would refer back to these ancient kings and these ancient dynasties in China for examples of when the ruler was just and moral and when they weren't, and kind of what happened to them. And you'd make your decisions based on that. So that was sort of, if you compare it, I guess, to the Western system, it was very similar to the common law English system. Somebody came to court and they had a problem, and the king made a decision, and everyone would sort of follow that decision. That was the law of the land. So it was a very similar type of study and learning. So it was not, go enroll and register for classes and get your dorm assignment and that kind of thing that we have today. So highly likely, Kukai was probably studying with a tutor and maybe a small group of other students, all from similar family backgrounds and all aspiring to be have a role in court or get a government position. So one of the reasons why this is important and really rare, there's very few people who have this opportunity to study with tutors in this way, and it would guarantee your family's security, because any kind of position like that came with a fairly hefty salary, and company car, and you get invited to all the cool parties and all that kind of stuff. So he spent several years in Nara doing this. If you've studied any Japanese history, you'll also find that Nara was known for the ancient temples that are in the capital. So these were the major schools of Buddhism that existed in China at the time. So what was happening during that period was Japan was importing a lot of knowledge from China, and that included, we can say the primary Buddhist scholarship. Basically, whatever was happening in China, they were importing it. And I think it's probably safe to say that a lot of this knowledge was coming into the country faster than they could assimilate it. So rather than taking time to understand it, they were just bringing it in. So they, in essence, this is a great oversimplification. You look to China and say, what appear to be the major schools of Buddhism in China. So someone writes back, we have these 6 schools. Okay, bring a specialist over from all of those 6 schools. I, the emperor, are going to build a temple dedicated to all of them, all in the same area, and then we can decide which one is the best. But at the same time, we can also benefit from this great wisdom. If China has it, we want it too, right? This kind of thing. I think it's similar to saying, okay, go to London and figure out what are the top department stores and import those department stores. Even if they're all roughly the same, or we don't know which one we really like, but I want to be able to shop at the top department stores, just like the most powerful nation on earth. And so let's get that over here. So what you end up with are these the 6 Nara schools. So if you look at, if you ever had a class, the very first class I had in college on Japanese history, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the 6 Nara schools of Buddhism. And it just lists them, and there's very little information given. But this is what Buddhism was, for the most part, at that time in Japan. It was these 6 temples. I'm sure they had branches in different areas, but for the most part, they were in the same area, of course, close to the capital where the emperor could talk to them. And it gave them an opportunity to experience the same Buddhism that China had. I was going to show you some more things on Google Maps, but I'm still having this really, for some reason, when I'm running Zoom and a web browser, it does not like that at the same time. So my apologies. So of course, Kukai is there in the capital, and he becomes interested in Buddhism at some point. So this period of his history is a little murky, but what we do know is he ended up taking novice ordination with one of the head priests of one of these temples in Nara. So that temple was Daionji in Nara, and the priest Gonzo was the head of that temple. And Gonzo gave Kukai a practice to do. And this practice would be very influential in Kukai's development, and becomes very much a part of the story of Kukai's life. So Master Gonzo was the head of the Sanron school, which was the Japanese pronunciation of Sanmun, the 3 teaching school. And this was a Madhyamaka philosophical school. So the Indian master Nagarjuna, who was also, I guess, philosophically the root of Zen, Shingon, and most of the East Asian, major East Asian schools that exist today. Philosophically, that's the philosophical basis for many of these schools. Sanron was this kind of philosophical. So Master Gonzo was known to be an incredible debater, very keen mind, head of his own temple at a fairly young age, and even lectured on the Buddhist teaching in front of the emperor, which is a fairly high honor. So somehow Kukai studies with him. So how all of this comes to be, we're not really sure. But my guess would be all indications were from a very young age, Kukai was very intelligent, showed a lot of promise. And that was probably very evident to Master Ganzo. So here you have this very bright student show up on your door, probably. My imagination, he knocks on the back door of the temple, and they have tea and start talking. And there's some late night conversations, and then Kukai is at school the next morning, and he's tired or something. Where were you last night? Oh, I was partying with the other guys from the other college. Studying Buddhism all night long or something. So this becomes an issue. So after a few years at university, Kukai is spending more time interested in Buddhist practice than in his studies, and pretty soon he kind of disappears from school. So he drops out. But he doesn't start a band. He doesn't, get a van and just start surfing in California or something like that. He doesn't start a .com and get rich off some, Silicon Valley project. He takes off and goes to the far end of Japan, Cape Buroto, which is at one of the far tips of Shikoku Island. And I was going to show you that, but I'm actually afraid to screen share this because it will probably lock up. So let's see if we can do.
Do you want me to try to look up something and share it if it doesn't work?
I was going to give you the link to do that, but let's see. See if this works. I just sent Jamie the link. Hopefully she might have better luck than me. This is really odd. So if you put that link into, actually, you know what? Let me try it again. It's suddenly working.
Okie dokie.
Technology is a benefit. I'm not sure what you guys see now, but let me do that again. There we go. Okay. So this is Cape Moroto. So let me zoom out so you can kind of see where this is.
Don't worry, we see the map.
Okay, great.
Just making sure you know.
Thank you. Now it's finally working. I don't know what was going on. So Kagawa Prefecture, I showed you this was Zensuji over here. And for reference, I was going to show you the Nara, Kyoto area. Here's Nara. So this is the area he would have gone to school. Osaka is down here. So he leaves school, travels back to Shikoku, and goes all the way down to the tip of the island to this Cape Moroto to do his practice. So Master Ganzo gives him a meditation practice called the Gumonjiho. The Gumonjiho is the Morningstar Meditation. It's the recitation of the Bodhisattva Kitikarva's Bodhi mantra 1 million times. There's a little bit more to the ritual than that, but in general, it involves reciting the mantra 1 million times. And he did his practice somewhere in this area. So if you go on the Shikoku Temple pilgrimage, you'll see temple number 24 is here. So this is the memorialization of his practice in this area. And then there is a cave here, which is believed to be where he practiced the ascetic practice. Oops. here's a picture of the cave. I went on the pilgrimage in 2009, and at that time you could go inside the cave. I've heard that it's no longer, you can't go inside anymore. But this is the demarcation of the cave. So it would have been believed that he would have done the practice in the cave and then looking out. So this is a good, a little bit better picture. Technology. Sometimes it does not want to work. Well, I will wrestle with my mouse as I continue to talk. So I was going to show you if you, there we go. So there is another temple just up the road. You can see this very beautiful rugged coast. And then as I zoom in, you see the statue here? Hopefully that's visible. I'm going to do this.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a statue of Kukai as a young man when he was wandering around the island. So that's part of the memorial as you go along that area. It's quite astonishing because as you drive, one of the interesting things is there's almost nothing on the coast. It's a very rugged coast. And you can kind of tell the mountains come right down to the road. So there's no space for farming or anything like that. So there's very little civilization in this area. And then out of nowhere, there's just this huge statue of Kukai. So it gives you an indication of, how impactful his presence was in Japan. We only have a few temples outside Japan. There's a handful in the United States, in the mainland. Most of our temples are actually in Hawaii. So in the mainland, there's really only about 5 temples. But, just on this cape, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 Shingon temples right in this little area. Plus, there's a couple shrines. So it gives you an indication it's much, his impact in Japan was quite incredible. So Kukai does this practice, and it takes, if you were to do the Gomonji Ho, at minimum 40 days. So you'd be, and by 40 days, I mean to recite the mantra 1 million times, anywhere between 15, 16 hours a day, nonstop. You're just taking breaks to take a short nap and eat. So it's an ascetic practice. It's a very intense practice. And Kukai has this sort of breakthrough. His eyes are open, you could say, to the teaching. I'm sure this is very much akin to, in Buddhist practice, we talk about the importance of study and practice. And this would have been where Kukai is able to have some insight personally for, the things that he was taught academically. So after doing this practice, he comes back to the city. He comes back to the world, and he writes, if you happen to, I have here Kukai's major works. So you can still buy this text. I have a old hardcover version, but in Kukai major works, the first writing that's translated in here is the Sango Shiki, the indication of the goals of the 3 teachings. And he's comparing Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, and which one you should follow. And this is important because at the time, for Kukai's time, and during in China especially, you would start studying Confucianism, then you would study Taoism, and then you would study Buddhism. And there's a couple reasons for that. They're answering different questions. So yeah, there's the indication of the three teachings. Starts on, it's about a third into the book. They answer different questions. So Buddhism doesn't talk about or discuss the origin of the universe. Buddhism doesn't discuss in many ways, not completely, but it doesn't get bogged down oftentimes with, what should the king do or not do? What should, how should people relate to one another in the family and these kind of things? It was understood, even in the Buddhist time and in the Indian context, but especially in the Chinese context, there were existing philosophies and religious ideas that answered some of those questions. So Buddhism was sort of slotting into the space in between the unanswered questions, I guess what I would say the yeah buts, and the Sango Shiki, the indication, the goals of the three teaching, answers some of those questions. And what Kukai is doing in this text is displaying his knowledge. So at the same time, he's saying, I understand very deeply. I have a deep understanding of Confucianism. I have a deep understanding of Taoism. And I have a deep understanding of Buddhism. And I understand how they work together. This is important for a couple of reasons. We all have questions. We always sometimes get sort of stuck like, I wonder, what's the answer to this thing? And sometimes those questions can spin around in our mind for a long time. Here's Kukai not only saying, I understand these teachings very deeply, but he understands them enough to see their shortcomings, or what he finds to be their shortcomings. And he lays out where he thinks and what the important part of Buddhism is. And so he goes through on the Confucian side and says, Confucianism is good for understanding your relationships to people, government, when you should support your family, when you should support your government, and when you should criticize the king, and when that's a good thing to do, because it shows you're a true patriot. And then he says, what I would say, yeah, but, at some point your life will come to an end. What then? So if you're solely focused on this world, if you're solely focused on your relationship with others and to the government, that's not the whole picture. So then he goes on and he discusses Taoism. I'm really paraphrasing, so I'm showing you the text. So if you'd like to read the Sango Shiki, you can. I'll pick some parts out for us to read together, but it's very interesting. He says, you talk about Taoism, and Lao Tzu talked about the origin of the universe and the division of light and dark, and kind of how things operate on a universal scale, and the sage's insight into the workings of heaven and earth, and how if you have that wisdom, you can sort of see those same energies playing out in human society, right? So from the heavens, you can see it playing out within the individual and in the macro. He says, but there's a limit to where that information takes you. And then he goes on and talks about the teachings of impermanence in Buddhism, and says, if you really understand that, then you have to think about the greater ideal, the greater good. And by that, he says, Confucianism is focused on, the key relationships between subject and ruler, husband and wife, teacher and student, these kind of things. But he says there's a greater relationship, and that's the individual to all other living things, and their responsibility to those. And he says everybody else misses that, this greater interconnectedness of things. And he says for that reason, he understands and respects Confucianism and Taoism, and recognizes that the Buddhist teaching is, in his mind, superior. And that's why he's choosing to renounce this career in the government that's been set up for him. He's leaving school and he's becoming a monk. So he distinguishes, that's what on page, at least in this copy, page 125, he distinguishes filial piety from great filial piety. And the example he gives is Magdalena. This is the exemplar from Buddhist tradition, of which the Obon tradition is taken. So Magdalena uses his psychic abilities to see his mother suffering, and then uses his spiritual practice to dedicate merit to the mother, to save the mother from her suffering, and then gives that teaching to humanity. And this is the basis for Obon memorial services, most of which you will see happening in Buddhist temples in East Asia, which a lot of times people interpret as ancestor worship, but actually it's spiritual practice on behalf of the deceased to help them. So Kukai calls this the great filial piety, right? Understanding our ongoing connection and interconnection with all living things. And at the end of the Sango Shiki, he actually has a poem where he explains the purposes and goals of the different teachings. So this is Kukai saying, I've mastered these philosophies, right? I've learned what I'm supposed to learn at school. So if you think I'm leaving because I'm just a dropout, that's not accurate, right? If you think, I just have misunderstood the teaching, that would be incorrect. This is his way of kind of giving a deeper insight into the teaching and practice. How should we understand this? All right, if you look at what Kukai is writing about, he's feeling drawn to something much bigger than himself. He's feeling, I think he's had an actual experience of this interconnectedness between all living things, and it's not something he can turn away from. The promise of a cushy career in government no longer is of interest to him, right? So
Hey, Sensei, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but your screen is blank now. It blacked out.
Oh, let me try the...
You're back.
Okay. I made the mistake of trying to use the web browser to show you the map again, and I won't do that. I will. It doesn't like Google Chrome, I think. So, so Kukai's experience is, his turning point is not, there was no trauma, there was no, not one of those stories that we hear typically today, right? He wasn't, I dropped out of school and I'm hanging out with my buds on the beach, and I took a tumble on that last wave, and then my life flashed before my eyes and I decided to turn this thing around. He had a much deeper insight into his own life and humanity, and I think from our perspective, we are being asked, right? What should we take from Kukai's life? We're being asked, do we have any insight into our own nature, our own desires, our own life goals, why we want those things, what responsibilities we have, what's the best way to carry out those responsibilities? have we spent time trying to understand our life? How do we conceptualize our life? Because Kukai wrote a whole essay. I won't say the Sangoshiki is a book, it's a long essay. He wrote a long essay kind of laying out those ideas and formulating his direction. And I think it's, for those of us who may still be, on the younger side, where are we going and why? I remember when I was in college, everyone said, these are the things you have to do, and then you'll have a good career and this kind of thing. But we never talked, at least back then, about what you really did with a job or a career. It was just, you had to go to college and then get one. No one talked about, would you be happy or satisfied with it? No one talked about, the kind of pressure it might put on you, or ways that you might have to compromise things you believe in. This just wasn't talked about. So I think Kukai was looking at, what would his life as a government official be? And this other idea was swirling around. And when he really compared them, he recognized that this insight he had about the interconnectedness of things and impermanence was too powerful for him to just, dabble with. He had to engage with it full time. And that full-time engagement is the reason why we have, a temple. It's the reason why there's that larger than life-size statue on the coast of, Cape Moroto in Japan. Is that his insight so dramatically changed a nation that there really is almost nowhere you can go in Shikoku, Wakayama, this whole area of Japan around Hiroshima, and all of these areas that is not deeply imprinted with Kukai's footsteps and his outlook. The whole Osaka, Kobe area is one that is very deeply and strongly connected with Shingon history and practice. So it's an incredible starting point for religious life. This is important. I want to kind of help us to have some appreciation. If you read or you glance at the Sangoshiki, one of the first things you'll see is there's a lot of references to Chinese history. So just randomly reading it. Long ago, when Emperor Wu of Han went searching for the secret of longevity, he came upon Shi Wangwu, the Queen of the West. And with her, he pleaded earnestly in a most polite manner for the reverent revelation of the secret. Fei Chang Fang learned the secret formula from an old man in a jar. So he's going on, he's making all these literary allusions. These are all the Chinese classics. So it's almost, as if he's writing from the Western perspective. And I went on a long journey and I met with, countless adversities in the same way that Beowulf did. And he's dropping all these literary allusions. I think for a couple reasons. One, Kukai championed education all throughout his life. And here was his way of saying, he's read all the great books, but also he's telling you all the great books are still incredibly important. So a lot of the day-to-day life lessons, he's pointing them out here. He's telling us what's important about them. And a lot of our understanding of East Asian Buddhism requires us to, at least once in a while, dip our toe into a bit of Confucian education and Taoist theory, so we understand where these great minds are coming from, what kind of things they were reading. It starts off, talking about the Book of Odes and the Elegies of Chu. So he's reading these ancient poems. He's not on TikTok. So I give you an example of, where he put his time and mind. So I will read you one section because I found it very poignant for today. So I think this is the hardcover version, which isn't available anymore. This is actually a old library copy that I got. Was it the Moraine Valley Community College Library? It was taken out of their circulation and sold online, so I snagged it because I'd never seen a hard copy. Page 111. So this is the advice from the Confucian perspective. A suitable place must be chosen for your residence. Bear in mind that proper human conduct is the floor of your house. Virtue, the bed on which you lie. Benevolence, the cushion on which you sit. Righteousness, the pillow on which you rest. Propriety, the bedding in which you sleep. And trust, the clothing which you wear. Being careful not to waste even a minute's time, study the sage's teaching, choose only what is good, and try to understand it. Study diligently, and never for a moment lay aside your book or paper and brush. So he's quoting the ancient Chinese classics and summarizing them, and then explaining their limitations and where the Buddhist teaching is relevant. And I think it's important because he does go in, to a lot of the government issues. I think with our pandemic, we find ourselves in a moment of seeing the weaknesses in governments all over the world to respond to, an ongoing tragedy. And Kukai at once in here says, the benevolence, virtue, and morality is important for people in those positions, but there's still the bigger picture of our interconnectedness in humanity. So he's able to really keenly focus in on our day-to-day issues and then kind of broaden out. And it's believed he wrote this when he was 23. So I did okay in college, but I was not writing philosophical works of this nature at 23. So it helped, I think, give us a better understanding before Kukai was enlightened, before he was sitting in front of the emperor asking for an entire mountain in Japan in which to start his monastery so that he could spread this teaching. What was he like as a young man? What was he like, as a college dropout? Why did he do that? And, it gives you some indication when you go into a Shingon temple why Kukai is the main image. And even if, let's say you're not interested in it from a religious standpoint, why he's so compelling as a one of the greatest calligraphers ever, incredible writers, religious minds, artists, historian, poet, the list goes on. So very rarely do you encounter someone so talented and they also happen to be completely and only interested in helping people. Because this is the starting point of him saying he's undertaking this path to help all the people of Japan and the world. So that's a big vow. You have to have some broad shoulders for that mission. So, okay, I've been babbling. So I saw there are a couple questions. Thank you for letting me know I went blank. I will try to, we've had a series of technological difficulties and I've tried different technology, but we'll continue to work on it. So normally if you get major works of Kukai, it comes as a paperback like that. So this is still in print. So it can be ordered or found online. One of the things I usually do, I have several copies, and even this copy This was a used copy, so I found it maybe Abe Books. There used to be a website called Fetch Book, which it doesn't exist anymore, but I believe there's a network of independent bookstores now. Is it bookshop.org or something like that, where they will search around different independent bookstores and you can find used copies. So I found used copies for very inexpensive of this. I don't recall what the new purchase price is, but this is still the best. The first 60 pages is just the background life history of Kukai, and then it gives excerpts of his writings. So it's still one of the best books in English on Shingon in general and Kukai's life. So you don't have to go broke buying a new copy. Oh, thank you. That may be a good way. I usually try to search. We are very blessed here in Portland to have the largest independent bookstore in the country, Powell's. So I usually try to search, and if they have any copies, and then there's a variety of very, let the internet be your guide. I think even on eBay, I've seen some used copies. So I don't normally, we don't get any kickbacks from purchase or anything, but it is very good. So, any questions? I've been talking for an hour, so I was going to show you some more Google Map, kind of fly over certain areas, but unfortunately, the interwebs do not want that to happen this evening.
I have a question, Sensei.
Sure.
During his time, Kukai was pretty well known, right?
Yes, actually, even during his life, he was well known in Japan and personal friends with the emperor. They would write letters back and forth. So, yes.
Has that remained true to this day in the country or only in relevant areas?
Oh, no. Kukai is incredibly famous in Japan. If you go to Japan and you just say Kukai, everybody knows who you're talking about. It's part of, that's why I say we are the most famous Buddhist school that nobody knows about. So
that's where I was sort of getting at. Like this is the person responsible for the school system, for the written language, but yet
yes,
Shingon is so obscure. Like if you go to a bookstore, it's really hard to find any books, for instance.
So in the West, probably everyone's heard of the Gutenberg Bible. You studied that in high school, and it showed up in your history book or something. While not totally accurate, Kukai is credited with creation of the Japanese alphabet. And the reason for that is he introduced a lot of Sanskrit, and Japanese kana writing system is based on Sanskrit. So the arrangement of the characters is based on the arrangement of the Sanskrit characters. So his impact in the country is tremendous. I really wish the tech was working. One of the things that Kukai did during his life is he built a dam in his hometown, and it's still standing. So he randomly learned some engineering while he was in China. You know how you do when you go on vacation. You take a plane and you run into a Boeing engineer and you sort of just absorb some aeronautical engineering, and then when you get home, you build a jet in your backyard for fun. That's the kind of guy he was. So he learned some engineering, and there's an area that had flooding, and that dam is still standing. Of course, it's been repaired over the years, but it's still there. So the impact was incredible. The same is true with medicine, introduction of medicine. There was a pandemic during Kublai's life, and he took the monks out and had them, work with the sick. So directly working with people. Because of that, modern medicine is new, and there's actually been a lot of conversation with our current pandemic, with the Spanish flu, and people's understanding of germs and things like that. All of this is still relatively new. During the Civil War in this country, um, you know, keeping things clean was a new idea. So up until that time in Japan, people get sick, they would go to the temple and pray. And because of the example that Kukai set of literally going out and healing the sick, that's where people went. So to this day, when people are ill, they will often go to Shingon temples to pray for relief. Kukai also brought back some Chinese medical formulas, and you can buy those at temples in Japan. So all of those things are, part of Shingon history. You can't really get away from it in Japan, but it is relatively unknown in this country. I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, who introduced Buddhism to the West? For the most part, it wasn't Buddhist clergy. It was academics, and on the Zen case, you do see a lot of people who were stationed in Japan during and after the war who became interested in Buddhist practice, and most of them gravitated towards Zen. There's probably a handful of reasons you can speculate why that is. I would say one thing that you may notice about a lot of those early people who introduced it, very few, if any, spoke the languages in the country. So one of the things you can do with Zen is, you can go to meditation classes. You can sit zazen, and you can practice quicker without the language barrier. Sometimes that wasn't always the case with Shingon. The other reason was the Zen schools supported the government, so they were in a better shape at the end of the war than the Shingon temples. Shingon did not, Koyasan did not support the war effort, so a lot of the temples were, both at the beginning of the Meiji Restoration and then during the war, suffered quite a bit. When you're not pro-war, then the government's looking around for metal to create bullets. They tend to come around the temple and take everything that's metal, like your bells and your ritual implements and things like that, and melt them down. So the temples got raided for that quite often. So a lot of Shingon temples were pretty rough shape. Koyasan was in pretty rough shape at the end of the war. It was very poor. So it was not in a position to welcome foreign guests and teach people. So it's really only been since the late 60s, early 70s that Koyasan as a center has been in a better position. So that history is very varied, but I think one of the other reasons is, if you look at where, by contrast, Zen, San Francisco Zen Center, I think just the American culture that was focused and centered in San Francisco, that's what people picked up. So Shingon came over with Japanese immigrants for a large part. This is interesting too. If you go to Zen temples. If you go to the Soto Zen Mission in Honolulu, look it up. They have religious services, not so much meditation. But if you go to Zen temples in America, they almost exclusively do meditation. So it's a choice, I think, on the American side to emphasize certain practices and de-emphasize certain practices. And I think if you're leaving, let's say you're a devout Catholic and you decide to switch to Buddhism, you probably aren't looking for something that looks a lot like Catholicism. You're probably looking for something that looks very different. And if you were to go to your average Shingon temple, you're going to see people praying and making offerings and, praying to be healed from their sickness. And that may not appeal to you, where maybe austere meditation would appeal to you as a the opposite. So I think those are some of the reasons. But yes, I promise you, we were very famous in Japan.
Big in Japan.
Yeah, we're big. We're very big. Anyone ever see the movie Akira, the anime?
Yes.
Okay, so in Akira, the Akira song. Let's see, Akira soundtrack. I just noticed this a couple weeks ago. I don't know where I was, but the music came on the radio, very random. And I noticed in the background, there's actually they're reciting one of the Shingon Daranis. The prayer is layered underneath the music. And there's Shingon symbolism in the movie. And a lot of anime uses Shingon symbolism. I guess one of the ones that's famous, I don't watch anime, so these are things I've been told. If you're an anime fan, you can let me know. I watched Akira when I was in high school, giving away my age when it came out. So the what's the other anime? The Blue Exorcist, I guess, uses a lot of Shingon symbolism. So there's several that are along those lines. So it shows up a lot in Japanese pop culture. Shingon is overtly mentioned in The Tale of Genji, so one of the most famous novels. Yeah, so it's very well known. Why we don't have it more here? It takes a long time to train clergy. During the war, all Buddhist priests were sent back to Japan or imprisoned, and many of them didn't go back to their posts. Those temples closed. Life was hard. So that's why most of the temples are still in Hawaii, because Hawaii didn't have internment. So folks were able to stay and they kept the temples going. So there's odd historical reasons. I digress. But other questions?
Thank you, Sensei.
Oh, you're welcome. I have to remember the song because it's actually quite catchy. I was like, oh, we should chant like that in the Akira theme song, because it has the mantra in the song. It has the Dharani in the song.
I don't want to look it up on my device that I'm on currently, or else I would.
I know I would look it up, as I can't remember what song it is, but I'd like to. I'm tempted, but I'll share it later.
I'm looking up right now.
It's in the background. I want to say it's Requiem, but
Can you hear me fine?
I think it's Requiem in the.
The word is requiem. Yeah, I think. Are you talking about how to pronounce it, or?
There it is.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, it's in the song. It's really cool.
I might watch it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Why not?
But if you watch, it's on YouTube, the Akira soundtrack. So the song Requiem is about 9 minutes in. They made the Dadani part of the song. So these things show up all the time in Japanese culture. But the artwork also, you know, the mandalas, the temple artwork. If you're in Kyoto every 21st, you know, anniversary of Kukai's birthday, which is June 21st. Sorry, the anniversary of his passing into eternal meditation, the 21st. Toji Temple has a major. They open up the grounds and there's like an antique market. So all these different people come out. So it's very much part of the local culture. But that's just one example I noticed. There was some random public access radio channel outside Seattle as I was leaving the temple up there. I was listening to driving back, and they were talking about the anniversary of that album, and they played the song, and I was like, oh, now I recognize it.
I just thank you for making this free. Like this entire Zoom thing.
Oh yes.
The only way that I could have accessed it was through the internet because I'm on the other side of the country.
Oh sure. Yeah.
Virginia.
Oh great. Yeah.
I had to access like some closed groups. Well, not closed groups, but like Discord servers.
Oh, I see. I've heard that there's some Discord server conversation about Shingon, so I'm not. I guess that's good. So, but yes, this is, as my teacher said, the Dharma is not for sale, but we have to keep the lights on. So. So thank you for putting up with our technological difficulties this evening. I will try to diagnose why screen sharing.
No problem. Like, don't worry.
Okay, well that's just our introduction to a little bit of Shingon history specifically. I just wanted to kind of draw people's attention to kind of how our founder got started and what his thinking was in the beginning. So we'll get, as with that introduction, as we go further, a little bit more into his philosophy and thinking, and perspective with regard to other Buddhist schools at the time, and what was unique about Shingon, some of those ideas. So I would keep in mind, you know, Shingon is one of the oldest schools of Buddhism. Tendai and Shingon are probably the oldest, you know, ongoing practicing schools. Zen was introduced several hundred years later. So, you know, some of the perspectives are a little bit different than how we see things from our perspective. So I'll try to keep that historical perspective for us too. Well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's my pleasure to, you know, we want to make the teaching available. When I started, this was probably the only book around, and there's still not many sources for information on Shingon out there. So part of that's just language barrier. So we will do our best with these stuttering mouse and technological hiccups that we have. So thank you, everybody. Happy New Year once again. We will obviously continue this series and others. Please continue to stay safe. Unfortunately, in our area here, I just saw we have, almost 700 new cases, and there's been a surge in the hospitals here locally. So although we are in the process of vaccinating people, it is still a challenge, and we all need to stay vigilant and stay safe. So we will continue to come to you socially distant and at a careful technological distance for everybody. So since we talked about Kukai this evening, in Shingon, of course, we recite his mantra, Namo Daishi Henjo Hongo. So we'll finish this evening with the recitation of his mantra. Namo Daishi Henjo Hongo. Namo Daishi Henjo Hongo. Namo Daishi Henjo Hongo. Hi. So in the same way that Kukai recognized the interconnectedness of all beings, we dedicate our merit to all sentient beings, and most especially to all of those who are on the front lines of healthcare, working to take care of those who are afflicted with this pandemic, and all of those suffering the direct effects of the pandemic. Thank you. Have a good evening. See you at the next class. Good night.
I hope you have a good night too, sir.
Thank you.